If you're new to our channel, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.
Whether we're growing our own produce using Dr. Earth fertilizer or Dr. Earth potting soil, or we go to our farmer's market and purchase produce in volume for very few dollars, we want to store it in some form or fashion. Maybe you choose that, decided that you do not want to go the route of preserving your produce by canning, whether by water bath canning or by pressure canning. But there are other means in which we can preserve what we've purchased or grown because we want to save it for the winter months, or we want to just buy in bulk and save that way as well. So there are some ways in which we can store our food without canning. So what are some of these ways, Holly?
Sure. So I guess something you can definitely think about how it's stored or how it's sold in the store. So maybe you go through the freezer section, you're like, I don't want to can, but I do want to freeze. I have the capacity to freeze. Maybe you would deep freeze, whatever. So then you would look and think, okay, I want to freeze XYZ. And if you go to the store and it's frozen, typically that means you can freeze it yourself.
That's corn, that's peas, that's green beans.
Broccoli.
We only freeze green beans because we just cannot get a when we can it, we do not like the texture that it provides for us.
It's not quite mushy, but it's not. It
doesn't have that crisp that we normally get in the can.
So that's another thing is maybe to think about is if you've had home canned green beans and you don't care for them or whatever, then perhaps maybe freezing is an option for you.
Leafy greens.
Greens.
Like kale, we freeze that. We blanch it and freeze it.
And there's some things you shouldn't can, like broccoli. Or if you wanted to do like a potato puree.
Well, you can do broccoli. We get that in the bag. You have to blanch it until
you freeze it.
Yeah, you freeze it, right? But you
that's
don't.
What I'm saying. You don't want to can it. So that's another thing to think about.
Another thing, soups and juices you can freeze. On that as well. Yes.
Okay, so root crops store well in a fridge. So they also do cool storage. So what you want to do is you want to think about a root cellar situation where it's going to be cool, a little bit of humidity, but not much, and away from direct sunlight.
If you have a basement or under a crawl space, root, that type of thing. Some people do devise a mini root cellar in their backyard. They actually physically dig down 4 or 5 feet and they create a little roof on it. There's some really interesting videos on how to do that. But what you're mimicking is, again, those plants thinking they're still underground and prolonging their edible consumption life.
Another thing is when you're doing root crops is to leave that dirt on them.
Yes.
You want to inspect. You do want to inspect the produce to make sure there's no dings or dents or rot, but you want to leave that dirt on them so that it helps create a barrier, extra layer.
It's amazing if you have a carrot that you've cleaned and a carrot that you've left dirt on, and you leave them alone in that, let's say, just a refrigerator, for example. How much more quickly the carrot that is cleaned dehydrates and disappears and shrivels than the one with the dirt that has that small layer of protection on it.
Another thing is that if you do purchase something from the farmer's market, especially if you're purchasing a lot of it, it's good to talk to the farmer. They would possibly have that information.
They will talk to you.
They will talk to you. They'll talk to you forever if you let them sometimes.
Yes, yeah.
So you definitely you could definitely speak with them about that, especially if you're buying a bulk item and you're like, I want to store this, I don't want to can it, I don't want to do XYZ, what do you recommend? And they've typically had that knowledge, experienced that knowledge in their own lifetime and probably been told by their elders how to deal with some of this stuff.
And the other thing is they may say, hey, you see that booth four sections down? That's Betty. She does a lot of that. Go talk to her. She'll know how to do that.
Farmers talk to farmers.
Yeah, teachers talk to teachers. Same thing. That's the whole deal there. What's our next way in which we can store without canning the produce that we are getting?
So you kind of alluded to this earlier. If you're making stock, a soup, a puree, etc., even pasta sauce, to freeze, and you want to freeze it, you want to be smart about how you're going to store it. So either like you put it into a zipper top bag, freezer bag, you want to store it flat, or maybe you want to make it into cubes, or you want to use freezer jars, but something that you can be smart about in the portions, because at some point you're going to thaw it and eat it, and you don't want to fill up a 2-gallon bag of pasta sauce and then
when
have
you
to
need
thaw
2 cups.
When you need 2 cups. So you want to keep that part in mind.
When using freezer jars, we've had difficulty, even when filling at the proper height or amount, that they will break, they will crack. So we're still fiddling around with that. The best way to maximize the space, and the Europeans do this because they have very small places that they live, from what videos that I've seen, allotment growers, they will take a cardboard juice container or milk container and cut it about 3/4 of the way off. So you just have the bottom cube. They'll put a Ziploc bag in there, pour their liquid in there, seal it up, put it in the freezer, let it freeze, and remove that cube, and then stack those cubes up like blocks in the freezer, so they can maximize the space that they have available to store their for their frozen liquids and juices and stock for later use.
Right. So that's definitely something to think about. Potatoes, and I think you could do this with other root crops, but with potatoes, you can nestle them in shredded paper in a cardboard box with holes, and that will help. And you want to leave the dirt on if you harvest them yourself, the dirt knocks off a lot of potatoes, but
don't scrub it purposely.
Yeah, and then you can put them in, again, a cool place. Potatoes do like some humidity. You do not want to store your potatoes in the fridge. What happens when you store your potatoes in the fridge is it changes the sugar content of that potato.
And it tastes nasty.
And it tastes gross. And it actually increases the carbohydrates in it. So, trust me, you're getting enough carbohydrates. You don't need to store your potatoes in the fridge and add more to your life.
If you're storing them in the basement, do your best to avoid storing them on a shelf elevated. If you can, put them right on the concrete floor, because that concrete emits a lot of coolness and chillness to those potatoes, and you'd be amazed at how much longevity you get out of potatoes sitting in a cardboard box versus on the concrete floor versus elevated on a shelf, if at all possible. That's what you want to do on that particular level. And you can consider vacuum sealing is a way of reducing, and you can do this without actually having a vacuum sealer. You can spend money and buy one that extracts all the air.
A rummage sale.
Yes, or you can use a straw in a Ziploc bag. So briefly, explain that procedure. It's not going to get 100% of the air out, but it does reduce a tremendous amount of oxygen.
You don't even necessarily need a straw. If you have something that's more solid or dense, and you just take it and you fold the top of the Ziploc bag over, squeeze all the air out, leave yourself like an inch at the top, squeeze all the air out, you're going to get a lot of air out of that bag. I do it all the time.
Air is the enemy.
Air is the enemy, especially humidity. Humidity is also the enemy. That's what makes your food go stale. So you could do it with a straw, too, if you want. I would not recommend doing the straw method with a liquid.
No.
But you would want to just suck the air out with a straw, close that zip top bag, leave about, straw width, put the straw in there, suck the air out, and removes a lot of the air.
And there's your ways of canning without actually, or storing food without actually canning.
For more information, please visit thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com.